evening, everyone. Welcome. I first came across Sean Wen's book, A 20-Minute Silence Followed by Applause, in Professor Stephen Church's Form Theory class this semester. I also had the pleasure of interviewing her for the normal school and found out her book was originally going to be a radio piece. The idea behind the story was to use irony, a radio producer doing an audio piece about a mine. Wen is a writer, a multimedia artist, as well as a radio producer at Youth Radio in San Francisco. Wen said a lot of what drew her to the project was playing with contradictions. She uses contrast and beauty and tragedy in her analysis of the late mime Marcel Marceau. Wen suggests Marceau saw beauty and tragedy in the invisible. She said so much of the book is about mind creating a universe and inventing laws of that universe, and that's also your job as a writer. If you feel like you have a story to tell and an enormous amount of material, you have to invent ways of telling it and write the formal rules for yourself. The book is a collection of essays comprised of short chapters, only 1 to 2 pages long, compiled from her extensive research of interviews and archived performances. The essays in the book touch on Marcel's tragic childhood cut short by war, his collections of artifacts from around the world, and she writes about his onstage performances and the silence he carried with him offstage, the tormented artist, and his almost complete commitment to his work. Wen writes about his first wife saying he would not speak to her for days on end. She called it mental cruelty. He called it rehearsal. She uses carefully chosen words to convey body language in a wordless art form. Wen writes about Marcel's well-known character, Bip the Clown, and his over-exaggerated movements, and then contrasts those essays with more natural gestures he makes acting as a mime. Her work is a well-researched collection of a man's life which had contrasting aspects. She takes the reader on a journey to explore the silence in written words. Wen was born in Beijing and grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. She holds a BA from Brown University. She's been awarded numerous fellowships. And ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Sean Wen.
Thank you so much. Huge thanks to Randa, Jefferson, and Kim. It's a pleasure to be here and to read for you tonight. Why this black box? The bare stage. Why perform in a darkened, scraped-out spot? The mime whirls his arms in the air. His gestures leave a trail. The awning, the veranda, the colonnade. A ghosted landscape rises up, wherever his fingers point. Before there was a thing, there was nothing. Earth was formless and empty. Such was the base. God created the world in dark space. The matter that we see, touch, and feel, the architecture and the moss, those were the remnants. No matter how hard we try, things that exist will never outnumber things that do not exist. He imitated everything, though. It wasn't imitation, it was play. Wasn't play. He was a bird, the shape of plants and trees, spoke silence, the language of fish. The body is boneless, loose, like elastic, the form of anything that vibrates or throbs.
I don't mind to look nice or cute. It must be tense.
His father was a Jew, a butcher, a communist. The name was Mangel, meaning lack or deficiency. His father went to Auschwitz, the body taken to the crematorium before his identity was recorded in the log. Marcel Marceau preferred not to reveal his given name. He thought that Mangel was too common in France. Too many people came forward claiming to be relations. He borrowed Marceau from a general in Napoleon's army.
Mine can't translate lies. For lies, words are
It's 1947. 2 years after the war, we meet the fool.
Well, my eyebrows are too close together, which can give a hard look to the face. So to seem more naive, I drew false eyebrows very high, about 2 or 3 centimeters above.
Marcel Marceau's first wife divorced him in 1958. She said he would not speak to her for days on end. She called it mental cruelty. He called it rehearsal.
I don't suffer from silence. I could be 2 days without speaking, and I wouldn't suffer at all.
His third wife, Anne Seco, called mine his only way of thinking and expressing himself. But then Studs Terkel said only one guy out-talked me, Marcel Marceau. I couldn't get a word in. He used his hands as he spoke. There used to be a rumor that he was a deaf mute. He dispelled this rumor by appearing on talk shows. Johnny Carson, Flip Wilson, Merv Griffin.
I'm obliged to talk. I don't like to talk especially.
But Marcel Marceau had a reputation. Those who conversed with him found his conversation as entertaining as his stage performance. His English was nearly flawless.
I think I am not so different from other people in my private life, except that I don't like very much to socialize. I am rather a person who is on his own. I like to paint, I like to read, to write, and I travel so much, you know?
There's a joke that Marcel Marceau released an album. The record consists of 20 minutes of silence, followed by applause. Marceau liked to recite lines from his own reviews.
Marceau explains why theater exists, where it comes from, and why it will be with us for a long time.
But that's not what the critics said. Walter Kerr actually wrote, Marceau really explains where the theater came from, why it is going to last a long time, and why we like it. Kerr did not write,
Marceau explains why theater exists.
that was Marcel Marceau. The empty stage is a universe without laws, up to the mime to conjure and rearrange, to make the dark space become alive with recognitions and quickenings. To him, absences can be transformed into a wall, a woman, a restaurant, a thief. The mime holds out his arms and motions that the world floats within the arm span of one man. We're in 1955 now. He arrives in New York for a 2-week run, but the Americans hold him over, and he stays for 6 months. Originally slated to perform at the Phoenix Theater, he moves on to the Ethel Barrymore on Broadway. From there, City Center. Applause begins before he even steps on stage. A figure in the deep. White, because it shows movement. White, because it hides the wrinkles. White, because we are frail. Marceau said,
Americans love something new, and I was doing something new. I brought silence on stage for the first time. I made the invisible visible. I created metaphors, and Americans saw the poetry.
As Chaplin danced and bumbled, Marceau studied the footwork.
I found the art in that silence.
And he sold it. In 1974, Marcel Marceau did an ad for Xerox's new color copier. The commercial runs for 90 seconds. Marceau mimics a robot. He pantomimes copying both sides of a sheet of paper and pushing the computer around the office. The ad ends with a guarantee. He says,
Call Marcel Marceau. If no one answers, it's me.
You are ever the beholder, the authority, the I. He is always the performer, the perceived, a puppet doomed to traffic in symbols, a constant stream of new gestures to calcify cliché. He is the life-size marionette, tumbling for our amusement. His fingers tickle at your ribs. You shudder and sigh. You are a bag of hot air, squeezed in his grip. Maybe he was in charge all along. What happens then? You call him genius, master, icon, the greatest, and he agrees.
I know what I'm worth. If Marcel Marceau did not know what he was worth, he would be in trouble.
Seeing is a way of possessing. With our eyes, we have what we desire. We are in control. But when we watch the mime, desire turns to envy. Our limbs are incapable of such articulation. Our muscles cannot call upon so deep a vocabulary. We're jealous of the volume and range of his movements. We cannot even mimic the gestures. Bibb's passions are not for us. Marceau on the King of Pop. Marcel Marceau had sympathy for Michael Jackson. He saw in Michael Jackson something of himself.
Michael has the soul of a mime.
He said. And what is the soul of a mime? What is shared by Marceau and Michael and all actors who stand on stage, making various gestures?
The soul of a mime is a complex one, part child and part artist, part clown and part tragic figure. I've seen Michael on TV for years and I think that he is a poet. But now he is in the tradition of French poets, like Verlaine and Rimbaud, because his subject is the lost childhood.
On December 4th, 1995, Michael Jackson promoted an HBO special at the Beacon Auditorium. His career was at its pinnacle. More than a decade earlier, Jackson modeled the moonwalk after Marceau's Walking Against the Wind. And ever since, he had been turning his focus, ever so slowly, away from the voice and toward the body. In a few days, he would collapse from exhaustion, but that night, he faced the reporters. One yelled, "Are you still married?" Another, "Say hello." All questions received the same response: silence. Instead, Jackson brought out a mime to speak for him.
For the first time, the King of Mime will work with the King of Pop.
Two men on stage, with pancaked faces and liquid bodies, held under a beam of bright light. Michael Jackson performed the invisible box routine, a metaphor for both their lives. The journalist Neil Strauss agreed that Michael Jackson was evolving. He wrote, "After Mr. Jackson's collapse, a medical technician said there was so much makeup on his face that medics had to lift his shirt to check his complexion." From Marcel and Me, a memoir of love, lust, and illusion by Paulette Frankel. His dominant French nose gave me pause to fantasize the corresponding length of other body parts. I was startled by his short stature and knocked aback by his pungent bad breath. The open kimono and low cut of his costume reveal his pleasantly hairy chest. From a distance, I thought he was a woman. His flesh was as soft as a jellyfish. I was the object of his feeding frenzy. I was pleased to discover that not all parts of his body were equally subject to the aging process. He cherry-picked his women from an abundant pool of the young and beautiful.
I'll call you.
Critics on aging. There's always something rather sad about any performing artist who fails to realize that his career is over, but Marcel Marceau is writing on his past achievements and name to such a degree that one's patience and pity is beginning to run out. That's Emma Manning from Stage and Television Today, 1998. Does aging give us wisdom? Does it make us stubborn? A telegram from the brain. Its signals are lost in a neuron forest. Water floods into the organ's grooves, but the mime continues to perform. For me, 2 hours of Marceau is like being trapped in a bar with an accomplished raconteur who insists on telling endless shaggy dog stories. That's Edward Thorpe from the London Evening Standard in 1984. Brain cells bloom, run wild, a fistful scatter in the wind. Every action is grossly overplayed, every facial expression exaggerated, and the humor is at least 50 years out of date. The characters cannot even read a newspaper without looking like rabbits chomping grass. That's Emma Manning again.
Who in the 20th century has been world famous as a soloist in mime?
Marcel Marceau asked the journalist, Robert Butler, in an interview in The Independent in 1995, who?
I ask you the question. Who?
You?
Absolutely. It is the truth. You spoke the truth. What I did as a one-man show throughout the world, no one can do again in the 20th century. Maybe in the 21st. I don't know.
Marceau and failure. Anne Seco was a 19-year-old fan who wandered into Marcel Marceau's dressing room. He was approaching 50. Camille was born. They married. Aurelia was born. Marceau said,
Does not pantomime offer the language of the heart?
in old photographs, Anne was slender in a white tiered dress. Her blonde hair was tied back in a long braid. In time, she came to teach experimental theater at Marceau's mime school. For years, they kept residence in Paris. In the evenings, he read, listened to music, and painted, speaking little to Anne. She said, it's a silent sort of exchange. Perhaps she's the only one who understood. He has silent cries. She's smiling from behind the camera. Her lens pointed at the leathery face of an old man. Anne shared her name with his mother. They divorced in 1984. She stopped teaching at the school in 1985. She founded her own company in 1986. What was all that energy spent on? Women are not worth striving for. The reward is too fleeting, and then the reward is too much. He said,
My personal life has been very difficult. I have been married 3 times. The marriages all failed. It's hard to be a family man in my position. When you're traveling all over the world, you can't have your wife waiting for you, like Penelope. Now one of my ex-wives is teaching in my school in Paris. We've become very good friends. In this sense, my life is not a failure.
in interviews, he referred to her as his former wife. Why then did some obituary notices print, survived by his wife, Anne Seco Marceau? Aurelia was about to go on stage when she heard her father had died. Anne was the director. She canceled the performance. Anne said, I feel an immense sadness. She said, he was a man who fascinated me. We are all shocked. A fetus uncurls like a fern. His back straightens, chest inflates. The force of air fills his lungs. His stride turns graceful and robust. The vigor of youth progresses easily into the confidence and control of middle age. But this lasts only a minute. The actor appears full strength for not even half of his 3-minute performance. He slows down, limbs tense. Steps stir, face grows twisted and eyes blank. The walk becomes a crawl, body contracting and vivacity fading from his face. A moment before the stage light drops, death perfectly resembles birth. Sound travels like water, flows into our body through inlets and ears. You don't have earlids, after all. We take it in. Flesh absorbs vibrations. Noise beats at your bowels. It taps softly at the roots of tiny hairs that cover your skin. It can tickle or nauseate. The force is invisible. A ghost. Sound agitates your nerves, like wind blowing against stalks of grain. As we watch the mime's expressive form, we lose awareness of our own. We forget to breathe. Thank God our lungs inflate and deflate on their own. This is why, at performance end, we scream, we stomp our feet, and we throw our hands together, and we violently reawaken to our bodies. Thank you. Kim opened her introduction to me saying that I'm a radio producer, which I am. I work full-time for kind of a media production company that serves NPR. And when I first got into the medium of radio, I was completely infatuated with it. I loved the idea of using a microphone as you would a camera lens, and exploring the world through sound. And when Marcel Marceau died, I first heard of him through reading the New York Times obituary. So I went into this project knowing probably as much or as little about him as you guys, as anyone does. I've seen, like cartoons of anvils and safes falling and squashing mimes, but that's about it. But I remember reading about his life up till the Holocaust, and him losing his family in the Holocaust, and his work in the French Resistance, where he worked as a forger mostly to obscure the identity papers of children and take them into Switzerland. And that was really interesting to me, the idea that he had a life that was so split, that there was this whole other existence before he went on to become the greatest mime of all time, right? The most accomplished performer within this very, very narrow focus. And that was interesting to me. Like, what is it to be so focused on craft and also to have a divorced existence from that? And so I had this idea of, I'd go to France and I would interview mimes, I would make audio recordings of mime performances, and I would make a radio documentary, which is exactly what I did at first. And maybe this is counterintuitive, but mimes are really talkative. Like, they generally are, right? Like, a lot of performers, a lot of creative people tend to be chatty, and I felt like they, in part, maybe especially because they can't talk on stage, they were all very thoughtful and very articulate about their work. But what happened was, the mimes who I interviewed were all so worshipful of Marcel Marceau. Most of them got their start because of him. Many of them performed in his theater troupe. And so everything that they said about him was so one-dimensionally good, which is the right. I think that tends to be a student-teacher relationship. If you have a positive relationship with a teacher, you have to worship them in some ways. But then I got into archival research, and when I dug into actual newspaper clippings and interviews of what Marcel Marceau said, what I found was this incredibly articulate, verbose, tortured, contradictory, kind of preachy and didactic figure. And that was when I realized that it couldn't be a radio piece, at least not a radio producer of my capabilities. There was no way I could figure out how to do it without it being hokey. And so that was when this became a text-based project. I didn't set out to make it a book. That was more of something that formed rather organically. It was I had all this material, and it was almost like a dare. Like, can I add to it? What else can I add to flesh out a little bit more? I'm sure that anyone would say to you that it would be incredibly, incredibly dumb to write your debut book as a lyric essay about a mime. So it wasn't planned. But I've been really lucky in its reception. One thing that was not planned with this book that is, you can't really call it fortunate, but it kind of is how things worked out, was when I started this project, ideas about resistance, persecution, were things of the past. Like, that part of the book was strictly a period piece. And as this book came out, suddenly these questions are really relevant all over again. And so I think that this book did benefit from a certain timeliness in being released during the Trump administration.